Thank you all for coming. Does that sound okay? So, I love Meg's novel, The Female Persuasion. I couldn't put it down.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It's very funny and it's very feminist. And I don't know if any of you have had this experience of you're reading a book and you think, the author wrote this for me. So, my first question is, did you write this for me?
Yes, I did.
Thank you.
You and others like you.
So I thought I would use quotes from the book as a way to jump into certain topics, and I promise there are no spoilers because you all should read this. It reads very quickly, and then you feel so good these days when you finish a book, right? It's a great feeling.
Also, it makes you look slender.
It does.
You hold it up, yeah.
So the first quote actually comes from near the end, and it goes like this. But lately, Greer had been wishing she could say something different to Faith. You made my head crack open in college, she'd tell her. Then for years, I watched you take whatever you had, your strength, your opinions, your generosity, your influence, and of course, your indignation at injustice, all of that, and pour it into other people, usually into women. You never then said to those women, okay, so what you need to do now is pass it on. But that was often what happened. The big, long story of women pouring what they had into one another, a reflex maybe, or sometimes an obligation, but always a necessity. So you dedicated the book to 8 women, and I assume they were the ones who poured themselves into you?
Yeah.
So I thought if we could run through that list quickly, because I recognized a couple of the names,
Sure.
but not all, and just tell me what your relationship. Rosalind Brown.
So does anyone know the novelist Rosalind Brown? She she has a new book out now. She is and was a wonderful writer, but whose books were more well known like in the 80s, I would say, and who had a recent book out after a very long period of time. And she was a friend of my mother's, and she's just one of these incredible women, one of these wonderful writers who's so generous. I was a child when I met her and instantly liked her. I went to an artist colony called McDowell in Peterborough, New Hampshire, and she and her family lived there. And they just sort of let me kind of join in their family. You know that feeling when you meet another family and you really love them? And she's just a terrific, warm person, really political. She and her husband were in the South during the Civil Rights Movement. Very interesting novelist, Rosalind Brown. Read her.
The second name I think everyone will recognize, Nora Ephron.
Yes.
Have you read her? Yeah.
Well, I never met her, but no, I did. I really did. I yesterday here I was talking a bit about Nora Ephron. So I met Nora because she made the first film that she directed was based on my book, and it was called This Is My Life, and 2 people have seen it, and it was about a stand-up comic. Anybody here see it? I'm going to have to ask the rest of you to leave. All right. All right, sit down, lady. Nora was someone I had really admired, of course, as so many of us did, and for her work as a journalist, an essayist, a humorist, a novelist, a screenwriter. She wrote Silkwood, and then a director of this, starting with this film. And in fact, the other night, Tom Hanks was here being interviewed by Maureen Dowd. Did anybody go to that? And And I met Tom Hanks some years ago, and he told me that the reason that he agreed to be in Sleepless in Seattle was because he had seen This Is My Life. Oh. And it was amazing. So, the film, I was very pregnant with my first son when Nora was kind of like scouting locations and looking for comedians to be in the film. And she invited me to go with her and her sister Delia Ephron, who co-wrote the screenplay, to look at comedians in comedy clubs. And I said, I can't go because it's my last Lamaze class. And she said, and I'll try to do her voice badly, she said, I'll tell you what they were going to teach you. So I went to the club. Childbirth was very painful. But Nora was amazing. I mean, she really was so generous to everyone who she liked and wanted to help and just be friends with. I didn't think of her as a mentor, nor did I think of her as myself as her protege. But I certainly know, looking back on it, that there was some of that in our relationship. We played Scrabble together. If you made her laugh, you felt really good. And in fact, there's a line in this book that I felt like she would have somehow, I wish I could have shown it to her. If you remember this line, Nell. So my character, Greer Kadetsky, is a sort of young woman who experiences who's groped by a frat brother at a frat party in college, and then meets a famous feminist and wants to make meaning out of her life. But I go back and look at her childhood a bit, and when she was a young girl, she was really shy. So she's left with the weird girl in the class, and they're sitting in the classroom eating Pringles, and the weird girl says to her, "Do you ever think about poisoning our teacher?" And Greer says, "No." And the weird girl says, "Yeah, neither do I." So I felt like Nora would have understood that joke, it's there to sort of bring out character. It's not just there as a punchline. And I got so much from her and really loved her, and we became great friends.
I wanted to ask you about the boy who gropes her. His name is Darren Tinsler.
Yep.
And I couldn't help but notice his initials are DT.
Total coincidence.
Total coincidence?
Somebody, in fact, told me of that during a reading. No, this is not a joke.
Oh,
I mean, I
someone else
started writing
noticed?
this book at this point, like maybe 4 years ago, when Donald Trump was just a long tie wearing hustler.
Yeah.
You know, total coincidence.
Although Faith and Gloria, there's a similarity.
Well, I describe Faith Frank as being a couple of steps down from Gloria Steinem in fame. So there's a certain aesthetic that is similar, but I hope to have created an inventive
We'll get
character.
to that later. Okay, we have to pick up the pace though on these
You're right.
wonderful women. Mary Gordon.
So Mary Gordon's a novelist. Anybody know her work? Yeah, okay, great. Since her first novel, Final Payments, and she was my teacher. And she told our class, a writing workshop, the greatest advice. She said, only write what's important. And what she meant by that, I think there's a parenthetical there, because she meant only write what's important to you. And it makes a college student start to think, wait a minute, what's important to me? You know, I mean, I can have things that are important to me. My life isn't just watching Bewitched. You know, there are things that I care about. Well,
You can do worse than create a TV show.
you
about
could. Anyway,
witches.
so she's remained a great friend. And we went from that period of being teacher and student to really being friends. And I don't remember when the leap was, but she sent me a postcard not long after college and signed it Mary, and I just felt, I'm in, you know, I'm in.
And how do you pronounce this? Rain Kidder?
Ren Kidder,
Ren.
oh, my high school English teacher. Yes, a friend from high school, Denise Cox. Ren Kidder was this gentle, wonderful English teacher. I took the Bible as literature with her, and she said, oh, my son is trying to be a writer, and her son became Tracy Kidder. So that was amazing. That was amazing. She was wonderful. She died not that long ago in her mid-90s.
Susan Kress.
Susan Kress, a colleague of mine. I had a brief stint as an academic. I gave up a tenure-track job because I didn't really know what that meant, and that nobody does that. Yeah, I'll make my way as a writer, yeah. You know. But I taught for a bit at Skidmore College, and she was an English professor there who is now a poet and is just a wonderful person who was so, again, what they have in common. There's just this deep encouragement without needing to get anything in return.
Hilma Wolitzer.
No relation, no. This is my mother, Hilma Wolitzer, who is a novelist and who is the greatest person, and she's 89 and completely as together as ever. Started publishing in the 60s, sold her first short story after having had no encouragement from her parents to be a writer or to even go to college. Her first short story, to give you a sense of her mindset at the time, was called Today a Woman Went Mad in the Supermarket. And I do think she would have done that if she had not been able to be a writer. So she's a novelist, and she actually told me something that I used as a sort of, well, she didn't tell me something. She was so encouraging to me that I put something in my novel, The Interestings, that came from real life. I had done a Q&A somewhere, and a woman stood up and said, my daughter wants to be a playwright, but I know how hard it is to do that. What should I tell her? And I said, is she talented? And she said yes. And I said, is she burning to do it? And she said yes. And I thought about it and I said, I think you should tell her that's wonderful, because the world will whittle your daughter down, but a mother never should, and mine never did. So that's why she's in that list. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, I'm going to tell a quick story from my book, which just the funny parts where my mother went to my third grade parent-teacher conference, and the teacher told her, Nell makes too many jokes in class. Could you ask her to tone it down? And my mom gave me the message on my 40th birthday.
Oh, that's so great.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh, how great that is.
One more name was Eileen Young.
Eileen Young was my therapist.
Okay.
When you said, Nell said before, and we'll have you go through the list, I'm like, all right, I've never said that one publicly, but there we go. Yes, and who died and who was incredibly helpful to me as a writer. I think it was one of the greatest things that I did was, just like talk about, my motto kind of is, if not now, when? I mean, if you want to be a writer, and I once did a panel with a couple of other writers, and this woman, there were two men, and they were really quite well known, and this woman who had her first book out, and she came up to us afterward, and she said, how do you write about the things you do? I'm just afraid about facing the other moms at the school in the morning. And I thought, you're going to hold back because of people you may not even know or like. Just write what you want to write. And anyway, there you go.
Fearless.
So I did.
So a question, though, about writing. So one of the things I love is you're such a precise writer, and your details just make every sentence interesting. So I'm just going to give a few examples. You describe a character as, quote, she still looked appealing in a very specific way, small and compact and determined like a flying squirrel.
Thank you.
And my favorite detail, her husband's side had a paperback mystery with raised letters. This is his side of the nightstand, with raised letters and a bloody knife on the cover called The Mice Will Play. Which I've requested that as your next book.
The Mice Will Play, yeah. My son said to me, Mom, I think you only write novels so that you can come up with fake books inside them, the names of rock bands. I actually just had an idea for an artisanal maple syrup company in my next novel, going to be called ASAP. So you can't steal it. You can't steal it.
When you're writing, do you stop to think of them? Do you go back and weave them in often?
No, I love to get into this weird state when I'm writing where when it's going well, you're just going, and you edit a lot of it out. Most of it is just horrible. Really, I end up with a haiku, but some of it stands, and it can't be there just to show off. I mean, that's my standard. It can't be there to show off. It has to be there to enlarge and enrich the whole.
So one of your characters, Faith Frank, is a leading feminist. And this, I just nodded along with this quote. I do what I can, said Faith. I do it for women. Not everyone agrees with the way I do it. Women in powerful positions are never safe from criticism. The kind of feminism I've practiced is one way to go about it. There are plenty of others, and that's great. There are impassioned and radical young women out there telling multiple stories. I applaud them. We need them. We need as many women fighting as possible. I learned early on from the wonderful Gloria Steinem that the world is big enough for different kinds of feminists to coexist, people who want to emphasize different aspects of the fight for equality. God knows the injustices are endless. So how much, are you friends with Gloria Steinem?
No.
No. And have you read her books?
Yes, and I just saw, a friend of mine wrote this play, Gloria, in New York City. I don't know if anybody has seen an off-Broadway play about Gloria Steinem. She's someone I've admired for a very, very long time.
She's really funny, too,
Yeah,
which a lot of people, in fact, I recently quoted, she said, if women could sleep their way to the top, there'd be a lot more women at the top.
Yeah.
And I also noticed your characters are so inclusive, LGBTQ, first generation, rich, poor, middle class. Have your books always had such broad representation, or is this something you're more aware of?
I'm definitely more aware of it now. But I think that they have for a number of years, just because I'm interested in a lot of things. By the way, right before the panel, Nell gave me a pin that says feminist on it, and I wanted to turn around to you and ask you a little bit about your relationship to feminism.
Well,
Oh.
the reason I love this quote is there's certainly women in powerful positions are never safe from criticism. And I co-wrote Lean In with Sheryl
I was
Sandberg.
about to get to that.
And recently felt the need to write a defense of, there's been a lot of backlash on Lean In that I think is shrapnel from people's anger at Facebook. And I can't speak to that, but I can speak to the Lean In side,
Yeah.
and it's frustrating to see, it was a sincere effort to promote gender equality. So,
Yeah, yeah. Did it change you as a feminist writing that book? Was there?
yes, because I think there's so many things that we feel are personal that once you dig into the research, you go, oh, that wasn't me. It wasn't that I wasn't polite enough or good enough. It's that I never had a chance.
That's right. Yeah, yeah.
Um,
Well, certainly in your book, which everybody should read, you really, Nell's book talks about being a woman in television and comedy, and she's really called out figures for sexism, and I think you're just wonderful about this. You've really articulated some of that really importantly.
So let me ask you this. Why do you think our culture, or I'll say men, are invested in the concept that women aren't funny? It's clearly false, and has always been false. But why do you think that is?
You probably know more about that than I do. I mean, I just was writing an essay about my own relationship to humor, and as a child, I wanted to be funny in some ways. Like I remember getting getting a rock from the backyard because it looked like a potato, and putting it on my father's plate, and exploding with excitement at the clang of cutlery on potato on rock. But among the cultural figures I had to draw from, and they were brilliantly funny, Lucille Ball, and then Mary Tyler Moore on the Dick Van Dyke Show, and then later on the Mary Tyler Moore Show. These were like grown women and sophisticates that I didn't relate to in the same way. But when I saw Gilda Radner, and I think that Gilda Radner may have been the moment when younger men got that women were funny. Like I don't know. It wasn't just like an older, well, not older, but it wasn't just a domestic figure. I don't know. But you really have the answer more than me. I just think they are afraid. They're threatened by the notion of a really funny woman. Isn't that?
Well,
really
I think
what it is?
it's valuable. I think our culture values humor, and so
Right. So then I want to share the value.
yeah,
Yeah.
and I also think when you can make someone laugh, you're in control for a second.
That's
You're
right.
having an impact on them.
Right.
And I think.
But I think it's also been spoken of though as they're not sexually attractive to them when they're being funny because they have more power and then the men might have less, right?
Yeah, but I
don't
think
know.
that's one of those, like in Blink, Malcolm Gladwell says, we have these reactions and then we just make up reasons for them.
Yeah, it's all
that
made up.
doesn't
It
make
seems all made up
yeah.
to me. I don't know.
Um,
That's I don't know. I got nothing.
Wait, can I read? I'm going to read a line from your book, though, that made me laugh out loud. And it's about, again, it's naming something. They're talking about naming an equity firm. It says, the goal was to make the firm or the fund sound like a fortress that could resist all invading armies. Eventually, these places had proliferated to such a degree that no evocative-sounding words were even left. It was sort of like the way writers had long been pillaging all the good phrases from Shakespeare plays for the titles of their novels, so the only phrases still available meant nothing. Soon, Emmett thought, people would be writing novels called Enter Guard.
Well, that was something I've thought about, how many Shakespeare phrases there were, and there was like nothing left. So much of that kind of secondary stuff in my book is just sort of the effluvia of my thoughts. And I put them together, and again, my son would be on it. Like, you can't really call it a novel, but I sort of do. Of course, this is the same son who, when he was a child, we were walking down the street in New York where we live, and We passed a McDonald's, and he saw a sign in the window that said, "Now hiring," and he went, "Mom, look, you can do that," because he thought being a novelist wasn't necessarily a real job. Maybe true.
My son was very shrewd. I remember we once in D.C. He was about 7, and he found a penny on the sidewalk, and he came running up to me and he said, "Mom, I want you to have this penny." And I was so touched. I said, "Thank you." And he said, "Oh, I want you to have this lucky penny." "Thank you." And he said, "But I get to keep the luck." Like he knew a penny was just valueless, but that luck.
That's so good. That's smart. That's smart. Smart kid.
Very shrewd. So you do talk about the issue of women. There's so much about women supporting other women,
Yeah.
but also one of the big plot twists is a friend not supporting a friend.
Yeah, a betrayal.
Yeah, and she gets forgiven, which I thought was very nice. But did you think of going the other way?
Yeah. I always find that you have an idea of where you want a book to go, and you drive it there as long as you can. And then eventually that truck may break down, and you think, wait a minute, I don't know that it really should go that way. I don't know that it should end that way. And you have to kind of live with the sadness of a change. But this was a friend betraying another friend and doing something really inexcusable. But I thought about myself and how life is long, and the forgiveness isn't immediate. It's not immediate.
Right.
I wouldn't want that to happen. It's not a TV show.
Yeah.
So, but I did think about going the other way. But it made sense to me that knowing who these people were, it's all about who are these particular characters, rather than a generic,
Right.
would a generic friend forgive another generic friend?
Right, and you made the heroine is flawed, and I love that the men in the book, there are allies and villains.
Yeah.
And I thought that was.
Thank you. Have you written fiction at all now?
Oh no! How do you know how long a chapter should be?
Oh.
That would.
Well, all you have to do if some of you are writing books and you want to end a chapter, you
Yeah.
just write, "Then she closed her eyes and went to sleep." And then that's it. The chapter's over. That's all you have to do.
No, I'm used to very structured writing
Oh.
from journalism where they're like, give us 3,000
Right.
words.
No,
or
I'm so
news-
unstructured. They'll just
Yeah.
publish. They'll just publish it.
Yeah, that's
crazy.
scary. While you show men being both allies and barriers, Faith says at one point that men always get to set the terms. I mean, they just come in and set them. They don't ask, they just do it. It's still true. I don't want to keep repeating this forever. So do you think society will ever solve this?
Boy, can you believe we're still talking about these same things
No.
that we were, during second wave feminism, right? It really seemed to me as a child,
I wish we hadn't used the metaphor of the wave, because waves come in.
yeah, and then waves go out.
they go out.
I know.
Yeah.
It's true. I think that it's very sad, it's heartbreaking that we still have to deal with the stuff we have to deal with. On the other hand, there is, of course, as we all know, this new sharpening of dialogue, and things are being said that could never have been said before, which one hopes will change society. But I've come to see that maybe we won't be around to see those changes. And it's part of an ongoing thing. I mean, when I started writing The Female Persuasion, I think I had this idea, well, first of all, that when it came out, Hillary would be president by the time I was finishing it. And I handed it in right before the 2016 election. And then I went back and wanted to work on the last chapter to kind of put it into a nebulous future. But I had the idea that sometimes things are a little better for women, and then sometimes they're a little worse, but you keep going. But you know what? What if the whole fabric can be ripped out like that magic trick with the tablecloth, What about that? And maybe that's maybe that's going to keep happening in some way or another. But the notion of resistance became really important. Rather than thinking about the long-term outcome, you just know, what are you going to do? Not fight? What are you going to do?
Well, my personal belief is I always laugh when people are like, "No, you must be so happy about Me Too," and I'm like, "Happy?
Yeah.
Not quite the word I'd use." But I think it happened because women felt we had nothing left to lose.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, that's certainly been true in communities of color who have been, women of color have been feminists, or important, powerful feminists from the start.
Audre Lorde got
oh.
it all right in the 80s.
Completely.
Completely.
And weren't listened to, marginalized, and could really then come out and speak and were some of the most influential women in America.
Yeah, Lorde has a book of essays called Your Silence Will Not Protect You, which is unbelievable.
Yeah.
And it could have been written
Incredible.
yesterday.
Yep.
So and you make that point so beautifully and as that there's just this repetition that it just needs to keep being stated.
I think so. I mean, for me as a fiction writer, I don't ever want to be a polemicist. I don't want to write, I'm not trying to I don't have a message.
You're not trying to change minds?
I'm trying to write, no, if that happens secondarily, I'm thrilled. But if I set out to do that, I think it would be not good fiction. I don't think you can do that with fiction. Fiction doesn't, because the people wouldn't be characters, they would be caricatures. I'm not setting out to change minds. I'm setting out, there's a great line by Zadie Smith about the novel. She says, "When I write, I'm trying to express my way of being in the world." And I think that's what I'm trying to do here. I think about these issues a lot. When you asked earlier about representation, I mean, if you write, people say to writers, write what you know. I've always thought that it's really write what obsesses you.
Yeah.
And I made a joke. I mean, if you really want to know what obsesses you, look at everything you've Googled for the past 24 hours. It's the most frightening thing. For me, it would be a combination of Virginia Woolf and Does This Mole Look Suspicious, which really would not be a great novel. But what obsesses you? What are you thinking about anyway? And I think that that's how you begin to think about a novel. What is marinating inside you over the years? So changing minds, it's exciting when people tell you something that you wrote changed something for them. It's thrilling, but I don't expect that.
Would you have written this any differently post-Me Too?
Probably, but I can't know.
Yeah.
I can't know. I mean, I started writing it like 4 years ago. So people would ask me when I was on book tour for it in April, did you write this after the Me Too movement started? It's like, what? It was like a few weeks ago. What? Do you know how a book gets written? I would have had to have hired everybody, and like we all would have gotten into a room and everybody could have taken a chapter.
You and Ronan Farrow sitting
That's
in a coffee shop plotting the whole thing.
Because the truth of this book, and I think a number of my books, The Wife included, is that these are ideas that all of us have been thinking about for a long time. In the case of this book, female power and misogyny, but also the person you might meet who sees something in you and changes you. I've been thinking about it for a really long time. And a lot of fiction, I think, that's going to be coming out that has to do with some of these themes. We've all been turning it over in our minds for a very long time.
Well, I'm glad you brought up The Wife, because I did want to talk a little bit about that. I mean, the relationships are so rich in this book, and I think maybe my favorite line in the whole thing is, "Marriages are like two-person religious cults, impossible to understand."
Thank you. Nell has brought up lines that like no one has mentioned. This is so great. This is so nice.
But they are, I mean, that is just, it's the
you.
perfect description.
Yeah, marriages are weird, right? Like that's why, like when people like want to get married, like I feel like my husband and I have developed our weirdnesses together. So who would have us now? We're like, we're just so, we're like this weird, right, binary, like this thing. We're like this thing.
But you also can't, you just can't get inside anyone's head. I was at Colin, my husband and I were at this big weird party in Vegas, and he had gone upstairs to watch from a balcony, and I was on the floor, and I was kind of fuming because he had run off.
Yeah.
And then later someone came up to me, and she was like, I admire your marriage so much. Like, you don't have to be together all the time. Like, oh, okay.
That's great.
So you just can't can't
No.
know. But in The Wife, that's a very different kind of relationship from
Yeah.
any of the relationships in this.
Yeah, it's a long rage-filled thing from the wife's point of view, definitely. Yeah,
Well, these are much more equal relationships.
yes, that, but also, that one has a historical bent. I mean, it goes back to Smith College in the 1950s, and the relationship begins when she's his student. So things, I had to give a little nod to what really was going on back then too. Yeah.
And I love Glenn Close's speech. Was that something? Did she run it by you? Did you know she was?
No, he ran it by
Well,
me.
didn't
No.
Nora Ephron used to write like Meryl Streep's help Meryl Streep?
Yeah,
with
no,
her
I know.
speeches.
I just, when Glenn won the Golden Globe, I love when Glenn,
My friend
Glenn,
Glenn.
my friend Glenn. Well, I was sitting at home eating a salad, and she won, and it was like the weird. I have to say, I mean, it's all been really thrilling with the film, but I just like when they said her name and the wife, and I remembered that I wrote it, the book. Oh, I'm not kidding. Like, I'm telling you, like, what the experience was like.
Well, it took 7 years to make the movie.
14.
14.
14 years. Yeah,
Yeah.
14 years.
She
had
had
this
that
movie
great
made.
line. It's like, maybe we shouldn't have called it The Wife.
Right, I know. But this thing happened. This is true. So the audience, she gave this incredibly moving speech, and it was great, and thanked me and the screenwriter right away, which is honestly like not common to thank the novelist, and it's not common enough,
Yeah.
and it should be, because she is a wonderful person and a wonderful actress, and she understands what it takes, and she is generous. Like all, I mean, like all of the women who I thanked
Yeah.
in my book, but they gave her a standing ovation, and without thinking, I jumped to my feet in my bedroom. I did. I just, I felt like honoring her, and it was so moving and beautiful. I don't know if any of you see that speech, and then, and then she won the SAG award. I'm like, oh, Meg Wolitzer,
I mean,
whatever. That was
she
a great.
talked about her mom. And
She talked about her mother and how her mother had felt she didn't accomplish anything, and her mother was such a wonderful figure.
Yeah.
And then in the SAG speech, she talked about the empathy that film can engender. And in fact, I always feel that way about fiction, because there was a study that talked about people who read fiction have a greater capacity for empathy, and we all knew that was true. We just didn't know the science, right? So there's so many overlaps, I think, and it's been so interesting getting to know her and talking about them, because she approaches character in one way as an actress, and the character. Did some of you see the film? Yeah. So much of it is interior, and I just like comb her face. Whereas in the novel, and I know they sold out, but in the novel, Joan Castleman, it's first person, and she gets to have her say. And the film, it's a very different kind of approach. So she took it and almost like inverted it really beautifully.
What are you working on now?
Oh, I was trying to write another novel. It's like it doesn't end. It's sort of like feminism, right? Like, seriously, you just get back on that and just keep doing that, because you're trying to work something out. And you're never going to work it out fully, but each book can sort of attempt it from a different place. So just start. And I have a children's book coming out, actually, for like 10 and up.
YA or
10 and up. It's called Two Night Owl from Dogfish, and it's coming out. I'm
what
going on
does
book
that mean?
tour. Oh, it means, well, it's sort of a gay parent trap. Two gay dads, single fathers, fall in love, and they live on different coasts, and they want their daughters to meet and go to camp and become friends, and the daughters want nothing to do with it. And it's in letters between the daughters. It's in emails and letters. It's fully epistolary. And my co-writer is a wonderful writer, Holly Goldberg Sloan, who's been, do you know Holly?
I love her.
Yeah, she's wonderful. And she wrote a wonderful kids book called Counting by Sevens that some of you may know if your kids or grandkids have read it. But
did you write letters to each other?
we
in
did.
the
Well, here's the funny
voices?
thing that happened was her husband, Gary, said when we said we wanted to write a book together, well, maybe you and Meg should just write emails. He just meant to work out what you want to write. But she started writing an email in the voice of one of the girls, and I wrote back in the voice of this other one. And anyway, we're going on book tour, so we're going to be all over the place, and it's coming out February 12th, so I'm really excited about that. Because I don't know if you feel this way now, because you've written so many kinds of things too, because you've written for screen so much, and you have this book, and you wrote Lean In. I feel like I'm the same person, writing these different things. People ask, like, right, how do you
Yeah.
do that, right? Aren't you it? Like you're there it is, your way of being in the world, just turned in a different direction.
Well, uh, it's so much fun to see if you can get in someone else's head and
Yeah.
get to. I mean, not everyone wants to be an actor and do it that way, and some of us just like doing it as writers. And are there any characters that you just haven't been able to get on paper because they're just so awful? I mean, I was on.
Oh, my book, Hitler, A Love Story? You know, that didn't work. It didn't work. Did not work.
I wrote jokes for President Obama and Hillary Clinton and was asked a lot about whether I could write jokes for Donald Trump. And I tried to do it and came up with a few like, Robert Mueller doesn't worry me. He's a veteran. He's been married to the same woman his whole life. He pays his taxes. Moron. And
Right.
but it hurt. Like after a while, being in that
Yeah,
head
you know, that's
hurt.
the thing. You have to enjoy what you're doing. You have to. I don't. There are things I don't want to write, and it may be because I know I can't do a very good job. But I would not. You know, you have to. The reader has to want to be there. That's something that my publisher had said early on. The reader has to want to go there and be there, and the writer has to want to be there too. So I don't. I suppose that they're pre-vetted and sort of turned down by me, you know, characters that I don't, it may not be just that they're horrible, but I may just not be interested in them or want to be with them. Probably.
But you don't get into the groper's head and have him justifying why he did it.
No, I don't. But
Yeah.
it wouldn't occur to me. But it's not that, I may not be able to get into his head, but it may not be because I can't. It may just be because it's not interesting enough to me to want to be there. I'd rather see the repercussions that that's had in this woman and how, you know, I wanted to get with that scene, that thing that happens, that has happened to a lot of girls and women. And it may not be a groping, but it may be somebody says something to
Yeah.
you or looks at you and you're young and your face goes hot and you think, wait a minute, what just happened? Did what happened? Is it an assault?
Yeah.
Do I have a right to be upset about this? Or is this what it's going to be like to be female? Do I just suck it up? And that moment of not really knowing was that thing I wanted to capture. And to me, that's much more interesting than an entitled or disturbed person in terms of understanding it. And that wouldn't be true for all writers. But for me, I liked, it's not necessarily who that person is, but what are the effects that has. See, because we get to him later in the book. I don't want to give too much away, but we find out a little bit more about him later on.
Jessica Valenti wrote a great book
great.
called Sex Object. And the first few chapters are just her recalling growing up in New York and having, at the age of 14, riding the subway and having older men say things about
Yeah.
her body, like, take care of those for me. And she said, look, these guys forgot they said it by the time they got to the top of the
Right.
stairs.
Right.
And she's 40 and still carrying every
Yeah.
stray comment with her.
I know, and I
Yeah.
wanted to, it's like, it's more nuanced. For me as a fiction writer, I mean, look, we can read about all of this in the online today. You can go home and it can scroll past you, everything political, everything about assaults, everything about Me Too and Time's Up. But if you write as a fiction writer, I feel like I want to be the master or a master of the warm take, not the hot take, because it's really about like the nuance. It's about how you feel about something. It's, for me, I'm not writing about lawmakers. I'm not
Right.
writing about that. Other people do that far better, and they're all at this conference too. But journalists and lawmakers. I'm not a journalist. I mean, I write I write reviews, but I'm really a fiction writer through and through, and it allows me to, I hope, go into the gray areas of how people live rather than coming down on one side or another. Because I've been asked that about the feminists in the book, the second wave ones, and Faith Frank is criticized for being sort of privileged. But I'm not coming down on any side. I'm just saying my mantra is really sort of, what is it like?
Right. Well, I believe in big tent feminism. And I tell a story about meeting Gloria Steinem for the first time. And we were up in San Francisco. And I had been very outspoken about female writers in late night television. Specifically, I had worked on the Letterman show and had come out with my experience, which was not a pleasant one. And Gloria had just come back from India, and she was telling these just the traumatic stories about, you know, Indian children are born 50-50 male-female, but by the time they're 5 years old, they're 52% male. So why is that? I didn't know this, but the families won't pay for medication for the girl babies. So I had this moment of great angst where I said, you know, I can't believe I care about late night television when this sort of thing is happening. And she leaned over and she patted me and she said, you worry about late night TV, I'll worry about India. And she smiled, she knew it was a joke, but her point was, and I think you make the same point here in that speech, the excerpt I read earlier, you do what you can in the areas you can.
Yeah, I mean, because there's something sort of, you know, when writers say, oh, well, I'm not really doing anything important, I'm not out there, you know, on the front lines. There's something narcissistic in the notion that the front lines are waiting for me.
Yeah.
I think that we do what, well,
Yeah.
but you know what I mean? Yeah,
No, and
right?
you salute.
I feel like there's the multiplicity of talents that people have and how they change people. You know, I have had moments where something I've written has somebody said that's led me to do this. And we don't know the exact effect that we have. I mean, I wrote a novel called The 10-Year Nap in which it's about a group of women who's after their children are born, they stop working and then 10 years pass and they have to think about what they want to do with their lives. And women said to me, people spoke to me as if I was invisible. When I said I'm home with my kids, I would see someone look past me. And I was very moved by hearing this and that the novel made them feel seen in some way. I mean, that to me is moving and powerful because who knows what you do with things you feel. That's up to you to do things with what you feel.
No, and you salute the non-famous feminists.
Oh, well, there's a line in the book, I think there are two kinds of feminists, the famous ones and everyone else.
Yeah.
And what I really mean is there are two kinds of people, the ones that we know about, but the people who quietly are doing good in all kinds of ways, just making meaning. Were we supposed to have questions?
I don't think
Okay,
so.
fine.
I'm going to ask one. So I like to go hiking, and I always give myself a problem to solve. And that problem is sadly always the same one, which is how do you get men to give up money and power? And I go up the hill trying to figure it out, and I come down the hill, and I still haven't. And I was curious if you had
How do you get men? First she asked me, why do some men say women aren't funny? And now she asked me this. You know what? I think that making the dialogue just be more and more common erodes some of that and changes people's minds. I'm sure that as dialogues become more common and there's no shame attached to speaking the truth of things, I think more and more people, men as well as women, will come around. At least I have to hope so.
Yeah.
Don't you think?
I hope so. It's
It's look. Will we be here for it? I don't know, but maybe.
Do you think we'll see a female president?
Oh, I can't. These questions. They told me it was. They said Nell. She's just going to be a little funny.
I told you I was going to hit you
Look,
with the gotcha question.
I have no idea. I don't know. It's all a mystery what's happened. Isn't it? It's like we're all in this big weird novel. People
We
say
are.
life is a
That's
video.
exactly.
People say
We're in the
that
big
theory
Meg
that life is a
Wolitzer
big
novel.
Right, that life is a video game. I think you're all in a Meg Wolitzer novel, and that's just I control the ending.
Well, make
Chocolate
it
for everyone. I don't
Make it
know.
a happy ending.
Then she closed her eyes and went to sleep. There's no other way.
Oh well, thank you so much, and yeah.
Oh,
she's
thank you,
amazing.
Nell.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Nell is actually on
I'm
stage.
going to stay here.
Is going to stay here right
and we're
now.
going to talk
so you can
about
hear more
TV
with Brian
comedy.
Reese. But thank you all for coming today. Appreciate it.